Right, all set. I shall be presenting a series of videos based around my research work, which hopefully will help me to get my thoughts together. And also some of you may find some of it interesting, I hope. And you could even leave some feedback in the comments section. That would be appreciated. The recollection of forms of spirit in James Joyce's Finnegans Wake. This will be an analysis of the ways in which recollection, cultural as well as individual, operates in Joyce's Finnegans Wake. Informed by Hegel's theory of Erinnerung, recollection, which is crucial to Hegel's own philosophical system, and which reverberates throughout the somatic imagery and linguistic artistry of the wake. I'll start by considering recollection as an imaginative construct, and explore the affinities between Joyce and Hegel, as the dreamer of the wake is characterized as involved in a self-developing process incorporating personal and cultural memory. The primary focus is upon the mysterious letter from Boston, with its repeatedly reinterpreted memory of Anna Livia Plurabelle and Humphrey Chimpton Earwicker's life together, through an interwoven series of signs and symbols, expressions and indications, interpretations and misinterpretations. I'll then follow by a critique of such an analysis, with its dependence upon a kind of picture thinking. The content of the analysis being thus considered as though it were static rather than dynamic. Then I will deal with the reproductive operation of recollection, with the associative, exploring the distinction between correspondence and coincidences, and finally with the creative. The objective, what I'm trying to do, is to identify universal forms of spirit in the text as necessary imaginative constructions formed through the operations of recollection, and thus pointing the way towards a form of literary criticism as an expression of textual objective rules, as opposed to one grounded upon an identification and analysis of symbols and their subjective interpretation. Part 1. The Babblers, with their Sanga's vein. I won't interpret everything as I'm going along, but obviously that quote there suggests babbling as well as songs. How appropriate. Not that I'm aware of one. Anyway, where was I? Must not get distracted. Here are two quotes that give some idea of how these two texts can be associated. From Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit. Scientific this is probably a Hegelian method, insofar as there is such a method. This is it, basically. Scientific cognition demands surrender to the life of the object, or what amounts to the same thing, confronting and expressing its inner necessity. And the passage from the Wake, which is chapter 5, where they are analysing what I mentioned before, the mysterious letter from Boston. Say, Baron Lucidor, who and Hegel wrote the darn thing anyhow? Well, Hegel, apparently. This is about my 5th attempt, so I'm going to keep going with it, however many mistakes I'm making, because otherwise I'll be here all day. So, off we go. In the course of an inquiry into a particular topic within an academic discipline, the inquirer may at some point feel obliged to offer an account of where their inquiries are to be situated in the history of the discipline, up until that moment when they are developing their ideas upon the subject, and to contrast their manner of addressing the issue with that of previous methodologies and modes of thinking. In particular, to highlight by what manner their engagement with the issue is different, and how what they are presenting is a demonstrable advance within their field of study. In the case of philosophy, much depends upon how philosophers view their discipline when it comes to the formulation of a methodology, and if their engagement is not with philosophical works alone, but with a work of literature, it is to be expected that clarification will be forthcoming on the matter of how their method of engagement is similar to or different from others that have been or are likewise engaged to give an account of how they can respond to or provide a critique of other analyses of the same text. As for the application of philosophy to issues raised by a work of literature, one mode of imaginative thinking, the philosophical, encounters another, the literary. For the method of thinking employed by philosophy to achieve knowledge and understanding is that of reason together with imagination, through the operation of which worlds can be created never before encountered, or ever to be part of experience proper, through which experiments can be conducted with the tools by means of which reason and imagination operate, namely language, by virtue of being able to invent new words and terminology that inherit connotations from pre-existing words and terminology, or that in time acquire connotations of their own. It can contrive endless possibilities. Indeed, it can generate an analytical exegesis for that most cryptic work of outre, a literary imagination, Finnegans Wake. From an epistemological point of view, with such a particular exercise of reason, a broad range of possibilities are generated that extend beyond the reach of understanding itself, the latter operating through a combination of what is given through the senses in experience and the principles and concepts properly assembled by means of which experience is structured and made possible. Reason is able to liberate the concepts of the understanding from the limitations that are imposed upon them by possible experience, and thus the understanding is further liberated from an otherwise essential and necessary bondage it is subjected to for experience to be possible. By way of this liberation, reason can expand the concepts beyond the empirical accessible, and it can then lead thinking into the realm of the fanciful and the illusory. However, reason and imagination create associations and connections in virtue of the faculty of recollection, given their propensity to react at a profound level with affective states and attitudes that in turn have been instigated by an array of associated remembered affective states and attitudes, and upon being subjected to their influence, similar affective states and attitudes are also recollected. Recollection is thus in this manner experienced, and furthermore, habitual successions of feelings and notions rapidly follow one upon the other while assuming their subjective forms, and while no longer experienced as complex, disparate elements, but as states of a unified whole. A work of literature can in this way mislead one into supposing that the feelings it engenders, be they aesthetic, ethical, or whatever, are an experience of a unified whole, whereas the actual process is a recollection as manifested in representational form. For instance, by Anna Livia Pluribel, the mother of all rivers, as she courses through the text of the Wake. She is present in River Run, which is the opening word of the wake. River run, obviously, which sounds like Erinnerung, German for memory. And in her monologue with which it closes, her current and innumerable sources, her tributaries, flow in from elsewhere and everywhere, an ever-flowing river of thoughts and feelings, rapidly following one upon the other, while memories float upon her surface like lilies. A restless effluence discharged into the profoundest of slumbers, her memories having floated away as she courses through the years into a sea of forgetting and of the forgotten. The everlasting universe of things flows through the mind and rolls its rapid waves, now dark, now glittering, now reflecting gloom, now lending splendour, where from secret springs the source of human thought its tribute brings of waters. Or, from a Hegelian perspective, the dialectical interrelatedness of various categories of thought is demonstrated through strikingly evocative language and imagery, whereby the kind of conceptual oppositions that are responsible for contradictions and cognitive bewilderment attain resolution through a rethinking of concepts that are themselves fundamental, that is to say, the manner by which the categories of universal, particular, and individual are conceived. Now, cognitive bewilderment. Aporia. Cognitive impasse, often where dialectic leads to. Patrick McCarthy, on the assumption that the wake is a non-linear digressive narrative, which I guess it is, contends that throughout much of the wake, what appears to be an attempt to tell a story is often diverted, interrupted, or reshaped into something else. For example, a commentary on the narrative with conflicting or unverifiable details. Which is to say, while significant plot details, such as HCE's sin or ALP's letter, are ceaselessly discoursed upon, the reader never encounters or experiences them directly, and as the details are constantly changing, they remain unknown and possibly unknowable. Further on the question of aporia, Susan Henke wrote of a sexual aporia woven into the tapestry of the wake. For her, the wake itself is an aporia. This is to exhibit the very kind of impatience that both Hegel and Joyce warns us against. It is to approach the text as static, concerning which knowledge should be forthcoming, yet all the while proving to be elusive. To quote from the Phenomenology, the goal is spirit's insight into what knowing is. Impatience demands the impossible, to wit, the attainment of the end without the means. And from the wake, now patience and remember. Patience is the great thing. Above all things else, we must avoid anything like being or becoming out of patience. And what I was saying about the universal, particular, and individual, those are the three categories of the notion or concept, begriff. Neither intuition nor sensation nor representation, nor solely universal. Philosophy strives to be notional rather than intuitive or affective. and notional thinking should take hold of rather than sidestep the richness of empirical, effective and spiritual experience with which the wake abounds. Upon the opposition between these categories being overcome, any stresses and strains upon the conceptual grid that we situate over the world in order to know it will subsequently be resolved to be replaced by a more rational, more unified perspective upon the world. Overcome, better explain that. You will know about this if you're Hegelians. Aufheben, sublated, to save, to preserve. The dreamer of the wake awakens to self-awareness, something that no one can achieve completely, not even in dreams. For an awareness of I involves the body, or of some determinate kind, and in addition, it implicates a consciousness of a world distinct from itself. A world which the I, accompanied by other I's, must sublate and then return to itself as spirit. The I is thus an active universal in essence involving both particularity and individuality. The I, that is to say, is a concrete universal. So, these are the categories that are central to every way of thinking. They are present in the process whereby the individual, Anna in the wake, dissolves into the universal depths, only to translate once more into particularity and individuality in an endless cycle. The allegorical fable of the attempted construction of the Tower of Babel and the resultant confusion of languages and confounding of communication can serve to make such issues clearer. It is incumbent upon the rational faculty to discover truth as a whole. We all know this quotation from Hegel. The true is the whole. Yes, I made a note there from Robert Anton Wilson, and that's not a typo. That is how the title is spelt, Coincidence. It's a very entertaining book on the wake. I'd recommend it. The point here is the Nat language, not Norwegian, night, because Finnegans Wake is a night book. Can best be described as hologrammic prose. Just as a hologram is so structured that each part contains the whole, Finnegans Wake is structured in puns and synchronicities that contain and reflect each other, creating the closest approximation of an infinite regress ever achieved in any art form. The absent is ever present, the dead are all alive, and the abyss of uncertainty appears in every multi-meaningful sentence. The Tower of Babel. Anyway, it is incumbent upon the rational faculty to rediscover truth as a whole, together with the unity of genuine knowing that emerges from such a rediscovery. Hegel expounds upon the means whereby philosophy is up to this task in the preface to the Phenomenology of Spirit, where he explains how it is that truth is frequently obscured by conventional ways of viewing matters, through a preoccupation with the antithesis between truth and falsity, which is a superficial and dogmatic way to proceed, in which, upon supposedly sufficient analysis, An inquirer either accepts a given philosophical system or parts of a philosophical system, or contradicts and rejects a philosophical system, or parts of a philosophical system. There it is. Very important passage. Furthermore, the very attempt to define how a philosophical work is supposed to be connected with other efforts to deal with the same subject matter drags in an extraneous concern, and what is really important for the cognition of the truth is obscured. The more conventional appearance gets fixated on the antithesis of truth and falsity, the more it tends to expect a given philosophical system to be either accepted or contradicted, and hence it finds only acceptance or rejection. It does not comprehend the diversity of philosophical systems as the progressive unfolding of truth, but rather sees in it simple disagreements. The bud disappears in the bursting forth of the blossom, and one might say that the former is refuted by the latter. Similarly, when the fruit appears, the blossom is shown up in its turn as a false manifestation of the plant, and the fruit now emerges as the truth of it instead. These forms are not just distinguished from one another, they also supplant one another as mutually incompatible, yet at the same time their fluid nature makes them moments of an organic unity in which they not only do not conflict, but in which each is as necessary as the other, and this mutual necessity alone constitutes the life of the whole. But he who rejects a philosophical system, the new philosopher, does not usually comprehend what he is doing in this way, and he who grasps the contradiction between them, the historian or philosopher, does not, as a general rule, know how to free it from its one-sidedness or maintain it in its freedom by recognizing the reciprocally necessary moments that take shape as a conflict and a seeming incompatibility. So, the appropriate method, insofar as we can talk about a method, I mean, I will keep talking about method, but there isn't really a method in Hegel. Anyway, I won't go into that, or I might do it in a later video. The appropriate method should rather take on the nature of dialectic, which is to say, the avoidance of oversimplifying through rigid oppositions, or the resolution of oppositions through the taking up of one side against another. On the contrary, the illusionary manner by which dichotomies underlie philosophical disputes are to be identified for the integration of contrary elements in the search for an Hegelian middle ground provides a key for unlocking the cryptic narrative of the Wake, which is to say, some preferred standpoint, a standpoint which alters with every form of spirit, as I suppose we could say the method does itself, insofar as there is a method, and another drawn from its apparent opposite. However, stumbling block that we need to overcome in a Hegelian critique of the Wake to do with the relation between philosophy and literature in general. For while they both contain truth, literature apprehends this truth in representational form. The character of ALP and the allegorical tale of the Tower of Babel have just furnished instances of this, but philosophy, at least as understood by Hegel, apprehends truth in an adequate, non-representational form of thought. And furthermore, the pivotal principle upon which Hegelian philosophy hangs is that the objective of philosophical inquiry is of the nature of subjectivity. This is some of the phenomenology, in my view, which can be justified only by the exposition of the system itself. Everything turns on grasping and expressing the true, not only as substance, but equally as subject. It is incumbent upon philosophy not only to understand subjectivity, but to express it. As for what kind of expression that entails, what exactly the subject is, how its nature is to be manifested in philosophy, this requires an introduction of the notion of spirit, Geist, or mind. I have a quotation from the Science of Logic there. So much is logic natural to the human being is indeed his very nature. If we, however, contrast nature as such as the realm of the physical with the realm of the spiritual, then we must say that logic is the supernatural element that permeates all his natural behavior, his ways of sensing, intuiting, desiring, his needs and impulses, and it thereby makes them into something truly human, even though only formally human, makes them into representations and purposes. It is to the advantage of a language when it possesses a wealth of logical expressions, that is, distinctive expressions specifically set aside for thought determinations. So, subjective expression then, and how its nature is to be manifested in philosophy, requires a notion of spirit understood as expressive of the nature of subjectivity, in particular through historically and culturally authoritative standards and practices. And this finds its expression in the everyman figure, in the wake. Here comes everybody. Within the dream, the Eowicca family assume many different names. HCE is the husband, father archetype, going by something approaching 1,000 different names over the course of the narrative. His wife, the river woman, Anna Livia Plurabel, also assumes many names, derived from some 9,000 rivers of the world. The twin boys, Jerry and Kevin, Akashem the penman and Sean the postman, and the sister Isabel and Isolde, legendary princess of Ireland, who had a doomed love affair with Tristan, assume multiple identities. Through the processes of spirit's realization of its own nature, from which everything derives a rational justification, there is present a rational core to all the diverse areas of human thought, history, ethics, science and philosophy, religion, politics, aesthetics, and discursive discourse, with which the wake abounds. The whole of human history is the ultimate expression of human subjectivity, a narrative playing itself out in the wake in modern Dublin, and which has its rational core in various forms of spirit. Forms of spirit, forms of thought. Another quote from Hegel's Science of Logic here. The forms of thought are first set out and stored in human language, in everything that the human being has interiorized, in everything that in some way or other has become for him a representation, in whatever he has made his own, there has language penetrated, and everything that he transforms into language and expresses in it contains a category, whether concealed, mixed, or well-defined. Borne down by the hump of guilt, Humphrey, who was a real as well as a metaphorical hump, is hump-free, as well as retrospective rational reconstruction. The coefficiency of reason and imagination gives structure and coherence to the dream. Forms of spirit. This is basically what my research revolves around, basically. The notion of spirit does not refer solely to the norms and practices that the culture takes to be authoritative, the spirit of the age, one might say. For were this the case, there would be little point in referring to an entity designated spirit, as opposed to simply the cultural norms and practices themselves. Spirit exists. Spirit is a reality beyond the material, but the authority of rationally justified norms and practices derives from their relation to the essential nature of human subjectivity as retrospective self-understanding, and this does not implicate certain norms having a special kind of authoritative command, which is the case if by spirit God is understood. What is of concern here is rather the expression of subjectivity through this capacity for retrospective self-understanding enabled by recollection. So the focus of my inquiry is upon one particular form of retrospective self-understanding, that of guilt. Humphrey's hump. Humphrey, HCE, has committed some kind of sexual indiscretion in Phoenix Park, an event of significance to the entire dream sequence. This everyman figure, with his shortcomings and failures, is burdened by guilt for what he has done, while taking upon his shoulders the collective guilt of all humanity, protesting his innocence while feeling guilt. And in the course of his dreaming he revisits many different versions of the offence. Recollection generates its imaginative constructs. That's what I meant there by as well as a retrospective rational reconstruction. They are not there simply as a kind of invocation of past happenings. Rather, through this central episode, the dreamer's embarrassing encounter with 2 teenage girls and 3 soldiers, details of which transgression alter with every retelling of it, are continually referred to by heeding suggestions within the dream. It becomes evident that it involves exhibitionism, voyeurism, onanism, well, masturbation, if you prefer, sexual deviances, and the like, as we witness the dreamer's sense of guilt assuming a more and more distorted and overblown portrayal through the recollection of a solitary incident. The central literary character of the Wake in this manner undergoes a biographical odyssey, from naivety to maturity, while embodying abstract concepts, whereas in the phenomenology, abstract concepts embody literary characters, as spirit embarks upon its biological odyssey, as theoretical debates of the past, rather than being merely descriptive, assume a dramatic form, as spirit makes its necessary moves, a necessity discovered in the content itself, every step of which explicates that very necessity. Within the standpoint of dialectical reasoning, subjectivity expresses itself as a journey to self-knowledge at both the communal level and at the level of the individual's self-development. This is from the Phenomenology. The task of leading the individual from his uneducated standpoint to knowledge had to be seen in its universal sense, just as it was the universal individual self-conscious spirit whose formative education had to be studied. The single individual is incomplete spirit a concrete shape in whose whole existence one determinateness predominates, the others being present only in blurred outline. Western and Eastern history may be viewed as a journey to self-understanding of a collective historical subject, HCE as spirit, which takes particular social norms to be its most important standards of value. Such standards have no existence outside the beliefs and intentions of the individuals bound by them, but because these individuals do not choose the social norms in abstraction outside of the context of pre-existing social practices, such norms and practices have an independent existence that assists in the socializing of individuals and in the orienting of them in their choices. When a particular group of individuals engaging in a particular social practice comprehends the norm underlying that social practice as a command, significant and noble standard of value, then spirit has assumed a particular form. Such forms are traceable in the narrative of the Wake. Once spirit achieves its realization, its logicality is posited in its necessity. This is from Hegel's Lectures on the Philosophy of History. An opinion is a subjective conception, an uncontrolled thought, an idea, which may occur to me in one direction or in another. An opinion is mine, but is in itself a universal thought which is existent in and for itself. But philosophy possesses no opinions. Philosophy is the objective science of truth. It is science of necessity, conceiving knowledge, and neither opinion nor the spinning out of opinion. So, once spirit achieves its realization, its logicality is posited in its necessity, which is to say it is without end, or rather a circle, by which is not implied circular reasoning. It emerges while in the midst of logical reasoning, whereby the conclusion is there from the very start. Similarly, whatever philosophy brings to literature is not new content, but rather it belongs within the context of a total necessary system in which moments in the text of the Wake may be apprehended in their necessity, a necessity neither extraneous nor imposed upon it, as the historical dialectical content of the fall and resurrection of HCE plays itself out. It may be objected that if dialectical reasoning with its resolution of conceptual contradictions is the interpretive approach to be applied in an analysis of a literary text, reportedly leading one's thinking about the text to higher levels of truth without any new content, then it would be hard to establish what is in fact transpiring in the process. Something must be the case, or nothing is. As Hegel says in The Science of Logic, essence must appear. Appearance is that which the thing is in itself, or its truth. Spirit is not being engaged with, and yet spirit requires that very engagement in order to articulate itself repeatedly, that is to say, in the forms of spirit. A kind of forms of spirit, by the way, I should have mentioned, in the German is Gestalten, or sometimes geistig, anyway, I'll get into that later. A kind of determinacy has to be assumed, which is by no means the end of the matter, for it contains flaws and contradictions. It turns out not to be the completed product, but spirit has to take on a determinate form, or else it becomes devoid of content. It is superficial, leaving a vague sense that something remarkable has been accomplished, wherein in truth the dialectic has ground to a halt. To be continued.